This is the Tame Aperture podcast.
Open the pod bay doors, Cal.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
Welcome to the Tame Aperture podcast, where we discuss movies from first-time directors, indie films, art house, and much, much more. Today on the show, we continue Horror Month with the 1985 classic film by Tom Holland, Fright Night, starring Chris Sarandon and William Ragsdale. So listen in and join the discussion as we go deep into this horror classic right here on the Tame Aperture podcast. I'm Gabe Bienendahl, filmmaker and film instructor and movie enthusiast, and I'm joined by veteran podcaster and horror film fanatic Alan Martindale. Alan, how are you tonight?
Oh, I'm doing good, man. How about you?
Doing pretty good. Not too shabby. Had to redo that intro about 10 times.
Hey, it happens to everybody. Trust me.
We're good. So tonight we're going to talk Fright Night, the 1985 classic film by Tom Holland. Now, originally we had booked my friend, producer who lives in Louisiana. He's also a film instructor at the University of Louisiana Lafayette. And also, similar to you, just loves horror films. But he had a family emergency, and so he was unable to join us tonight. So it's just me and you.
All right.
And
hey,
we're
I'm down.
We're going to have to figure out how to break this down.
I'm down. I'm way down. We're talking horror movies. I'm a happy man.
I'm in. Now, I would categorize this film as horror, but I might, and this is what I was thinking about as I was doing some preparation, was like, I might actually classify it as a horror comedy.
Yeah, I've seen that description quite a bit for this movie, but it wasn't what I expected. I thought I'd seen this movie, but I hadn't actually.
So tell me, okay, so this was a first-time watch.
Yeah.
All the way through. Now, I had originally seen this about 2 years ago with Donnie, this producer. We were thinking, let's go and try to make a micro-budget feature film. Mm-hmm. And we'll do it in the horror genre because it seems to be one that's sellable. And it also seems to be one you can do for a lower-end budget. And he wrote a film, really good. He was the writer of it. He put the screenplay together. And it's a fun story. And I read it, and I'm like, there's no way we can produce this thing for $10K. And after reading it, it was kind of based on the model for this film called Fright Night. Now, I had never seen Fright Night up to that point. But in this research of like going through different stories and different horror films, I watched Fright Night as a result of what he had written. And so I watched this film a couple years ago for the first time. And then, of course, this week was rewatching it as in preparation for the podcast. And I still think it falls into that genre of horror/comedy, but not in the slapstick way.
Right.
But just in kind of, it's paying, it feels like immediately when I'm watching it, it's paying some homage to classic horror films. It has classic characters.
Oh, totally. Absolutely.
You know, vampires, kind of the Dracula character, and so on and so forth. And I think we'll dive into that a little bit further on. But this is here's the quick film summary for Fright Night. Teenage Charlie Brewster is a horror film junkie, so it's no surprise that when a reclusive new neighbor named Jerry Dandridge moves next door, Brewster becomes convinced he is a vampire. It's also no surprise when nobody believes him. However, after the strange events begin to occur, Charlie has no choice but to turn to the only person who could possibly help, washed-up television vampire killer Peter Vincent. So there's our synopsis of the movie. And it does go into, it's immediately, what's interesting about Charlie's character is he's a horror film junkie.
Right.
So you have to be able to relate
immediately to when he was making out with his girlfriend and he had the old horror movie on. I've never been in that situation, but I could relate to being in that situation. Yeah. If that makes sense.
I love that opening shot, which is this long crane tracking shot that starts in the street, in the neighborhood, one continuous movement all the way through. You see some of the credits come up, and then you see the title card say Fright Night. I love the red lettering of Fright Night. Yep. And also love how the F and the T
yep.
begin to drop down in the formation of the Dracula teeth.
The fangs pop out.
The fangs.
Loved it.
It's fantastic. Yeah. And it's definitely got that vibe. And I love how, and then that shot continues. Mm-hmm. And it gets into this scene that you're alluding to, which it goes up through the window of a house. Mm-hmm. And this whole time in the background, we're hearing audio of some kind of television show.
Sure.
And it gets into the house, and here it is, and lo and behold, there's Peter Vincent, who's this late night horror host,
right?
Who hosts a show called Fright Night. And then it cut the camera still, it keeps going, and then it cuts over, and we see, and this is the introduction to our main character, our protagonist. We see Charlie. He's in his room making out with what's presumed to be his girlfriend, and we find out later that it is. And this is Amy. So we have Charlie and Amy, and we're introduced to these characters. And this scene's kind of interesting because I think there's some things going on here. I think it's the classic introduction into what you might consider a horror film, which is teenagers making out.
Oh, absolutely. It kind of is the quintessential setup to a horror film.
You have to do that, right?
You have to do that.
That's the first thing. So they get into, and what I found interesting about the scene, beyond the cool technical shot, it's a cool technical shot with smooth crane and track all the way through. Fun kind of introduction into Peter Vincent. It gives you a little backstory. Later, we're going to meet this guy that's on TV because Charlie can only go to the person that he would assume would know how to handle the situation, and that's this guy. So we'll meet him later. But in the scene, I love how Charlie gets immediately irate.
Oh, I know.
So Charlie tries to take it too far.
Right.
He tries to take it too far with his girlfriend. She's not really having it. She tells him stop. He can't stop. He tries again. She finally sits up and says, "Hey, that's enough." And his first reaction is just pure anger.
He's livid.
He's livid.
It's weird watching that nowadays because nowadays he's going to be blasted on social media and his life will be ruined.
Yes. If Amy had access to any kind of social media and she felt it necessary to voice what was going on with Charlie in that bedroom, Charlie's life might potentially be done for.
I mean, it's fun going back and watching these old horror movies because that stuff just doesn't fly these days, you know? Like the 80s were different.
It doesn't translate. And that takes us into that time of the 80s, which culturally it's just kind of a different world, of course, than it is today for a lot of reasons. Mm-hmm. But I just loved how he got so irate off the bat.
Just pissed.
And then the funny part about it is the switch, because once he gets upset, he sees out the window, there's something out the window, and there's something curious that draws his attention, right?
Yep.
And what is that thing? Do you remember?
It's the two guys hauling the coffin down into the basement.
So immediately he sees a coffin, which is only when you see a coffin, what does it allude to? What's the
death?
Death.
Someone's dead.
Immediately we go to death. And so once again, similar to what we were talking about last podcast, there's kind of this introduction behind the whole thing being set up in this tone of death.
Right.
And so there's two guys taking a coffin. And also that's like a weirdly strange thing, of course, to see out of your bedroom window.
Yeah. For
your neighbor who just moved in, moving a coffin into his basement.
It might be enough to distract a horny teenage boy from his anger.
That's exactly it. Because eventually Amy comes around and says, okay, let's get into the bed.
Right.
And Charlie's basically like, no, he's now been diverted by the neighbor who's taking a coffin into his house. Which was enough for him to forget about his anger. And
totally forget
his sexual frustration.
Totally forget about it. I mean, he's talking about how this, it's been a whole year with her, and he's all he gets is no. Finally gets his opening, and he's gone.
Yeah,
he's gone.
And this is funny because I wonder if it was enough. Look, I'll put myself out there. You go back to the teenage me,
mm-hmm.
The 17-year-old me, and as much as a weird coffin in neighbor moving a weird coffin into their house would be strange, it may not prevent me from the offer that a girlfriend just had.
Not happening.
You know what I mean?
Not happening.
So Charlie has a little more, I guess you could say, willpower, but really in the sense of the story.
But the thing is, Peter Vincent was on the TV. She even tried to distract him, being like, "Hey, Peter Vincent's on the TV." That didn't bother him. Even though he's a horror junkie.
True.
But in real life, if a horror movie's happening next door, then he's going to be interested in that.
Yeah. I have a little bit of hesitation to call him a horror junkie.
Yeah. He just seems like a typical 80s teenager to me. I mean, he doesn't look like a teenager, but...
And I know that's what it says in the description, right? And that's part of what the process of the story is that he's into... But he's a horror junkie, and we'll get into that a little more because I don't think he is.
I don't think so either.
Either someone's writing these summaries and they're not quite understanding the character, or he's a Lightfoot. He's not a real horror junkie.
No, I don't think so. I don't think so.
So, but back to this idea that basically that was enough to have, for me, either the story can continue or it can completely end at that point. And if it's me, once again, taking myself back to that age, the story's over.
Right. Oh, yeah, totally.
The movie just ended.
That's it.
Because
it's 5 minutes long.
It's 5 minutes long, exactly. And it's a short film.
Exactly.
About nothing.
About absolutely nothing.
So props to Charlie for having a little bit of curiosity.
Yeah, he got a lot of people killed.
Yeah, because the curiosity then leads us through the story.
Exactly.
So we know there's a coffin, and we're trying to figure out what those characters have to do with the coffin. And this does incentivize Charlie to want to go and figure it out. So he kind of starts to his own little curiosity approach and has a little bit of investigatory work to do.
I really enjoyed the little interaction they had with the mom downstairs.
Okay.
How the fight continued and they went downstairs. The mom character was in it for only a few minutes, but I thought she was hilarious.
Yeah.
Because she is super interested. Like, she didn't care that they were up there about to have sex. She wants them to go get married. She wants to get remarried herself. Like, she's all in. I really enjoyed her.
You liked Mom.
I would have liked to see her more in the movie.
I think that Mom, for me, in that scene, because after they end up not having sex, they go downstairs and they interact with the mom. And does he actually say anything about what he saw outside to his mother at that point? Do you remember?
I think so, yeah.
You think he does, but the mom, here's the other thing about these parental figures in these horror films, where like she is a little more fun and a little more interesting than I think Nancy's mom from Nightmare might be.
Oh yeah, totally.
Right? But also they're kind of still secluded. They're kind of oblivious to their own thing.
These kids are left to their own devices, and I think that's kind of the 80s. Like, that's what was happening in the 80s.
I think that's
latchkey kids.
Yeah,
they were kids who were coming home from school. They just had their key. No parental figures around because everyone's off working for the American dream. And I think you see that a lot in horror movies, and not just horror movies, but movies in the 80s. And I think that's why. And
it's kind of interesting for us now, because like me as a parent, I might like. My daughter won't ever be in a room, at least in my house, by herself,
right,
with a boy.
Oh, never.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely not. And I'm certainly not. I mean, if they come downstairs talking about how they were just about to make love, someone's gonna die. I'm gonna break some legs. Like, that's not okay in my house.
The shotgun's coming out of the cabinet.
Exactly.
And then it's really gonna turn into a horror movie.
Yeah, exactly. For real. Yeah.
So I think that's a funny cultural change that's taken place in the last 30 plus years. And what's funny is, because I'm an 80s kid, and you categorize yourself as an 80s kid. Yep. So it's like, we say latchkey kids and things like that, and it's true. And what the irony is, now that we have kids, we're the opposite.
Right, exactly.
The reality is, once I was 12, like my mom didn't, and my parents are great. There's nothing against my parents. Sure. But they had no clue where I was when I was.
No way. You're out
anywhere.
Raising hell around the neighborhood. And yeah.
And I was, riding bikes, jumping dirt mounds, building forts.
Gully,
exploring
the forest.
Jumping in the river, whatever it was. And they didn't have a clue.
Yeah.
And we are those kids that had all that. And now we're in some ways hovering and helicoptering over our own
I find
kids.
myself doing it all the time.
Yeah.
When I catch myself, I kind of kick myself, but I
do
it all the time.
I do too.
Yeah.
And I have to remind myself. And what might be a good reminder is just to step back a little bit and remember how you had it.
You don't want to be Nancy's mom at the end of Nightmare where it locks her in the house. She locks her in the house. You don't want to be that parent either.
That's taking it too far.
Yeah, exactly.
And you also, initially, you don't want to like condone having sex in your room when you're 15.
Right.
Up in the, so it's a fine line. We can learn from these parental figures in horror films in the 80s.
I've always maintained that you can learn a lot from horror movies in particular, because people kind of shy away from them. you can learn a lot from him if you just kind of look at the subtext.
Absolutely. No, so they come down. Nothing ends up happening. Charlie was frustrated, but now he's more curious. That sparks the story. It goes forward. And from that point on, Charlie's in full investigatory mode. Mm-hmm. And he's trying to tell everybody that will listen, anybody and everybody that listen. Now, Charlie's back in his room at some point, and then he sees across, now everyone's gone, and it's night again, and across into his neighbor's window, he sees Dandridge, Mr. Dandridge, who's the neighbor, who's just moved in, and he sees him and a woman in the frame of the window. Right. And they look like they're about to be intimate. Right. And what I find, so I love the musical cues that play into some of this. Uh-huh. The overall tone of the film, musically, there's a little bit of synth or a little bit of like streaky guitar. Right. And things that are very 80s. Very 80s. But like then romanticize certain moments in the film, and it feels like a novella. Or a novella, or something that has that kind of vibe to it, because he's looking across the room, or the window, and here's these two people about to have sex. Right. But then Dandridge looks back at him and notices right before he's ready to go in for the kill as a vampire bite, and he notices Charlie looking at him, and this is a catalyst for now Dandridge needs to take care of this problem, and that problem is Charlie. Right. But I love the music in that. Oh, for sure. For sure. It's just funny, and it kind of plays into these kind of. It's not campy music, but it, like I said, it just has that streaky guitar. It's that 80s. I mean, I'm not a fan of that type of music, but when I watch these movies, it does feel a little campy. Like there are times, and we'll talk about it later, but there are a couple moments later on, like, oh my God, just overplaying this synth music. It's just driving me crazy. Yeah. Charlie is clued into what's going on a little bit more, and then Dandridge goes in for the kill. Yep. And then the next day it cuts to it cuts to a newscast, and you hear about some kind of murder or some kind of death. That's later on in the cafeteria. It plays up the fight between Amy and Charlie. Oh, yes. Like she busts through, he and Evil. I just love that character, by the way. Oh, yeah. I want to talk. There's amazing. Some things to go into on that character. Exactly, for sure. But she kind of, busts through them. They're standing next to each other, and they kind of play up that fight. And then they make up, and right when they make up, then he gets distracted again by the news. That's right. Then he gets distracted by the news report, and the news report is about a woman who's been murdered. Yeah. Right? Which we assume and kind of put two and two together, and also Charlie does. Basically, it must be that woman that he saw at Dandridge's house earlier. And at this point, you don't really know. Like, and I mean, I didn't know. I'm thinking about it now. When you're watching it, you don't know. Yeah, like it's kind of hinting at the vampire stuff. There's a lot of foreshadowing with the old TV movie and all that kind of stuff. And at this point, I thought I knew a little bit about the story, but I hadn't seen the movie. I thought they were going to play into this throughout the whole movie. Like, you don't really know if he's really a vampire or not. It becomes very clear later. Yeah. Within just a few scenes. Exactly. Immediately, we know. So basically, I remember at this point, Charlie he's put it together. He thinks he's a vampire. And as the viewer, at least for me, I was thinking he might be crazy. But he goes to Evil. And he offers Evil like $5 to tell him how to kill a vampire or what to do. And Evil thinks he's crazy, but he tells him what to do. And he gives the typical vampire lore. Right. He talks about the crosses, the stakes, the holy water. Mm-hmm. I think there's a couple other things in there. But this is where I take umbrage to the fact that Charlie's a horror film fanatic. Right, because he would know that. He would know that. Those are simple things that Charlie would know. Right. Everyone knows that. Yeah. Even me, who's not a vampire horror fanatic, would know that those are the things. I don't think they mentioned garlic at all, which is. Yeah. Where's the garlic? I'm a little upset about that. Yeah. They forgot garlic. That's classic. This is all Dracula stuff. But he goes to Evil, who's his. I guess Evil's his friend, but they don't really feel like they have a friendship in a sense. It's almost like Evil doesn't like him. And that Charlie's almost making fun of him all the time. Like I didn't quite understand
what their relationship was.
Yeah, I was confused on the dynamic between the two.
Right.
And maybe that's what it is. Charlie almost looks down on evil. Is that?
I think so. And I think later on, it really hints to how evil's feeling bullied by a lot of people. But they really don't play that up early on. It's just kind of inferred towards the end. Or not towards the end, but closer to later on in the film. Yeah, I would have liked to seen that. I don't know if stuff got left on the cutting room floor with Evil, but it felt like his role was a little underdeveloped to start off with.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And but he is a point in the story that gives Charlie information and gives the viewer information about, okay, if this, and also Evil, like you said, doesn't believe that Charlie's telling the truth.
Right.
He actually might think he's kind of poking fun of him.
Right.
And trying to get him to,
But one important thing that Evil says is he can't, because he's worried that the guy's going to come kill him.
Yeah.
And he says he can't come into your house unless the homeowner invites him in.
Yes. So there is one important piece of information that Evil delivers, which is the invitation. Right. And that's what it is. And because the next scene is when he's at home, his mom asks him to come downstairs. And Charlie has the information, like, you can't come in. Right. You can't come in and he's got this piece.
He's feeling super comfortable.
He's feeling comfortable in the house.
He's even whistling while he goes down the stairs.
Yeah, hey, Mom. He's all excited.
Yeah.
And then he gets downstairs, and lo and behold, Mom has already invited Mr. Dandridge, a.k.a. the vampire, into the house.
Yep.
Right? And that's an interesting scene. That scene, to me, I Chris Sarandon, who plays Dandridge.
I think he's so good in this.
He's so good.
He's such a great villain.
And at the same time, I honestly he made me forget about Prince Humperdinck.
When I first saw him, I'm like, Princess Bride.
Yeah.
Princess Bride. I'm not going to get it out of my head. But then he was so good that I forgot all about it. Now when I see him, I think I'm going to think of this role.
That's interesting, because I was actually thinking the same thing, which was like, this is Humperdinck, this is Princess Bride, but he plays into it so well. What makes his character for you when you're watching his performance? What was that draw?
It's certainly the charm, because I think a good vampire has to have that charm, but he was able to play it in a way that he was very charming, but it was very sinister at the same time to specifically Charlie. And I think as an actor, that had to have been a very difficult thing to do. But there weren't musical cues. It wasn't like they weren't overplaying it. I think it was all in the performance, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
And just the way he said, now that I've been invited in, I plan to come all the time.
Yeah.
Whenever I want.
Yeah.
And I just thought it was so charming to the mother, but also very sinister towards Charlie.
That's great. And that dynamic and that kind of duality is, I agree, what makes Sarandon play such a good vampire role, which is like he can be sweet in a way and seductive.
Yeah.
And then also be kind of evil and mean-spirited.
Man, he just plays such great villains. Because Prince Humperdinck, man, I hated him. I still hate him. To this day, I'll watch that movie, and I just despise that character so much.
Yeah.
And I didn't despise Dandridge, but I definitely, I was kind of charmed by him. And I think that's what a good vampire or a good villain kind of does. You got to be charmed by him a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the traditional approach to the Dracula or to the vampire, which is they have to have a seductive charm.
Absolutely.
If they don't have that, then they're just, they're a wild animal with nothing to, like there's nothing there.
30 Days of Night vampires.
Right.
That's what they are.
Right. And so it's almost like they've got to have a little bit of a charisma that allows the viewer to have a sense of like even a little bit of sympathy.
Yeah.
Or they're endearing.
Exactly. You have to understand why some of these characters can be enchanted by them.
Yeah.
You have to understand that a little bit.
Yeah. So now in the story, it's basically we know that Charlie knows. We also know that Dandridge knows. Dandridge has that conniving smile, like I'm coming back when I want.
Yep.
Does he come back that night, or is it later?
I think it's that night. I want to say it's that night.
Just trying to put the timeline in my head.
Bed. I remember that. It cuts like pretty hard cut to her sleeping.
That's right.
And then him kind of walking and whistling.
Because, Dandridge actually comes in. He's in the mom's room.
That's right.
And he comes in through the mom's room and kind of sees her sleeping, and then ultimately goes into Charlie's room and he hides in Charlie's closet.
Right.
And Charlie comes in. And this is a great shot, too, And actually, it was scary. It's
It was.
the idea of like someone being in your bedroom. There's always that, and then of course, really emphasizing that by giving the viewer the knowledge of where the monster is, and the main and the character not knowing. It's that kind of traditional horror setup, which is like, I know where he is,
right?
But the character doesn't.
And there's always and it's a classic horror shot because it works so well. It's the main character in the foreground in focus, and the monster out of focus emerging. And it goes back to, I think my first memory of it is Michael Myers in Halloween, when Jamie Lee Curtis is sitting on the floor. She thinks she just killed him, and then out of focus, you see him just sit up. Yeah. And that's the first time I remember seeing it. But it's such a good shot. And I guess you could say it's overused, but it's still effective. It's still very effective.
I found myself scared still, and this is not a movie where you're necessarily jumping out of your seat
right.
in fear, or like with Texas Chainsaw, you're not necessarily like just utterly disturbed by what you're seeing. This is a different kind of horror film. But I like where you're alluding to, which is that shot, and then maybe there's some traditional aspects to that shot in other horror films. But I was actually scared because, and it also had to do with the pacing. So
sure.
Charlie walks into the room, and we get him into the foreground, and it stays on him for a long time before there's actually an emergence of the character of Dandridge from the closet.
So that building up that tension,
that anticipation builds into that, and then of course when he comes out, Charlie, he after about 10 seconds finally realizes as he's kind of moving backward that there's something behind him. He gets the sensation, which is also a cool play into all of our own psychology. At some point, when in your life have you not like turned around quickly? I mean, for whatever. Right. But at some point, like there's someone behind you.
It's like being in the basement. You turn off the lights. You got to run upstairs.
Yeah.
You never know who's behind you.
You never know what's going to come out of the shadows.
Exactly.
But it's a great shot. And then this is finally, there's some confrontation, like real confrontation. And Dandridge starts to talk to him, and Charlie's frightened. And then Dandridge gets very physical with him. He picks him up. He's using some of his strength as a vampire to kind of physically manipulate him around the room. And here's what I have a question on in this particular scene, which is now, he picks him up. He throws Charlie. He's got him pushed out the window, or kind of out the windowsill, as if he's ready to push him off the outside. And Charlie grabs a pencil from his desk or somewhere, and stabs Dandridge in the hand. And this makes Dandridge just completely. He becomes incapable of doing.
It's like it paralyzed him or something. It was bizarre.
That was the question. Like, what is it? Because it's a wood pencil, and it had. I mean, you think of the wood stake, and the stake has to go through the heart,
right?
But like, what? I didn't get it.
I didn't quite get that either. I think that's probably why it's a mini stake. But it seems like they're so invulnerable, except for these specific things, like a stake through the heart, or a cross to the forehead, or sunlight. So I didn't quite get that either. I think it's mainly probably just a tool to show the audience that they are vulnerable. He's vulnerable, and he can be hurt.
There's a vulnerability to the monster.
I guess that's what it is.
It angers him.
Yeah.
To the point that he actually begins to turn into his demonic version. And we see this is one of the real first kind of practical effect shots.
Yeah.
Where we see a lot of the prosthetics. What were your takeaways from the prosthetics and the look of the actual the demon or the vampire in this?
I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I mean, when they went full vampire mode, I absolutely loved it. I mean, that's up to that point. It's like, yeah, whatever. But right when they get the horror junkie in me. I'm like, yes, and you see that throughout this film when they do the practical effects. It just speaks to my soul for some reason. I just love. Better than the CGI stuff. It does something to me. It makes me. This is what I love in horror movies, is seeing that kind of stuff.
Do you ever look at it though, and do you watch it with that same eye, or when you look at it, do you go with a 2019 eye? Well, that's good. But
some movies I
like.
Do
you know what I mean? Do you try to separate the 1985 eye or lens from the 2019 lens?
I don't know if I can fully separate it, but I try to just look at it for what it is. There are some movies, a lot of the later Nightmare films, where I'm just like, ugh, really? But there's just something, like the campiness of it, the ugliness of it, and the imperfection of it really, really gets me going. And I didn't think there was too much of that in this movie, especially with the vampire makeup and the prosthetics and all that. I thought it looked great.
It's always interesting for me because when I'm looking at it, once again, I fall back to this lens of a filmmaker.
Mm-hmm.
And I go, man, they did a really good job putting these prosthetics together. And this looks legitimate. This is a great look.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, in my 2019 lens, I go, it's a little outdated.
Right.
It doesn't quite hold up. And that's not a knock on the actual the prosthetic itself. It's just when you get so inundated with CGI, because you can look at CGI too and also be like, that's fake.
Right.
But there are certain things that translate over and you're like, that looks fucking amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And it looks believable and it looks real. And so that's part of it. Like, part of it's like, I love it. I get amped up about it. The other part of me is like, it kind of takes me out because I go, this doesn't feel maybe as real as it could.
The thing that did that to me in this movie was the teeth, especially later on with some of the other vampires we'll get to. It's the teeth. It like they're trying to talk with these big fake teeth in, and it just doesn't hold up. It doesn't look right. I think it'd be just as effective if they just put a couple fangs in there.
Hold on to that thought because I think I know where you're going and I want to talk about that.
Yeah.
And the teeth in specific. Dandridge reveals himself. He's gone full vamp.
I don't know why Dandridge just didn't kill him, because he jammed the door for a specific reason, exactly so she can't get out and stop him.
Right.
So I don't know why, but for some reason that was enough with the pencil through the hand for him to be like, I'm out of here.
That's right. So they leave the first confrontation, and up to this point, and now Charlie knows for real. This is a real thing. He already did. He had his assumptions, but now it's become actual. And at this point, he goes to the only person he knows who he can, and that's Peter Vincent, the host from the TV show Fright Night.
And this is why I think it's so funny, because Charlie, he's not looking for practical solutions. He's looking towards people who would have knowledge of something totally fake. Like he goes to evil first of all, and this kid is obviously a nerd. He's obviously the horror junkie here.
Yeah, that's the other thing is we said Charlie is
right,
but it almost feels like evil.
I think evil
is the actual junkie.
Right.
Yeah,
and then he knows evil, knows a little bit about this stuff, and then he knows a guy who plays a vampire killer on TV, an actor. And that's his second person he goes to. So Charlie doesn't really know what he's doing. He doesn't really know where to get help. And the fact that he's turning to these two people who obviously have no idea what's going on, don't believe this for a second. I don't know if it shows his desperation or his ignorance, but he's definitely looking for answers.
You're basically calling Charlie out as a fraud.
Totally.
He's in terms of horror.
Exactly.
Horror fanatic.
I mean, this is bogus, man.
Charlie's a fraud.
Exactly.
He does end up going to Peter Vincent, and then it's revealed. We kind of know, like, immediately there's something off about Peter Vincent.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't believe what he portrays on television.
Not at all. And also that job of hosting these movies and acting in these movies is all he has in life.
Yeah.
That's it. That's what he has to hold on to.
Yeah. So he goes to Vincent. Vincent kind of blows him off.
Mm-hmm.
If they were true horror junkies, you'd think there would be some interest. Even if you know as a horror junkie it's not real.
Right.
In the back of your head, there's still like something going, what if?
For sure. And I get this all the time. Like I was talking to my girlfriend and my buddy Nate the other day. I don't believe in ghosts, but they were talking, about the possibility. And we're talking about horror movies and all that. And I was like, man, I would love to actually see a ghost. I would love for one of these experiences to happen to me because I want that in real life. Like I don't want to be chased by Leatherface, but to know that there's a possibility of something actually going on, that's fun.
Yeah.
That's intriguing. And the fact that these guys, neither of them are like, let's figure this out. Let's go investigate this. They're frauds.
Even the smallest inkling of curiosity.
Exactly.
So they don't believe what it is they portray to believe.
Right.
Yeah. And that's funny that you say that. Well, and you wouldn't want to do we'll go back to Leatherface. That could happen.
Right, exactly.
What's fun about the ghost, or in this case, a Dracula or a vampire or a monster of any kind, is that there's some kind of supernatural essence to it.
Right.
That we're all as humans going, could it, is it?
Right.
And even if you say absolutely no,
It's
still intriguing to talk about or at least consider.
For sure.
For fun.
For sure.
And Peter Vincent blows him off. His girlfriend Amy and Evil, they actually think Charlie's gone bananas.
Yeah, definitely.
They think he's crazy.
Definitely.
They think he's losing his shit. So they end up getting in touch with Peter Vincent.
Well, and this is something I wanted to talk about a little bit. It's a little creepy that these old people keep being attracted to this teenage girl. Because you remember when Charlie goes to talk to Peter Vincent, he blows him off. But as soon as this girl shows up on his doorstep, he's like, "Come on in. What can I do for you?"
Yeah.
And you could tell I don't know if this is on purpose, but it seemed like there was a bit of an infatuation there. And it's just a little creepy. It's a little creepy.
It's definitely a little creepy.
Yeah.
It's also possibly true, just in
for sure
the nature of human beings, which is like an older gentleman seeing an attractive young female,
for sure,
is going to just naturally be more responsive.
Right.
But
even the weird freak that she has tagging along doesn't deter him at all, because Evil's tagging along.
That's a good
with
point.
Her. Yeah, he zoned in right on her, and it was a little creepy to me. And it happens later on in the film too, and it's just a little creepy.
It is creepy, but it does happen later on, and of course we'll get into that with Dandridge.
Right.
And that's a different dynamic.
They give context there of why why there's an infatuation there.
Now, so much so that Peter Vincent will actually listen to Amy, of course, and as such, he will appease them,
right?
And basically, try to go help Charlie figure out that Mr. Dandridge next door is not a vampire.
Right. Well, she pays him, but
she gives him money,
right? Because he just got fired from
he got
job.
fired. That's true. So they kind of throw that into it a little bit, like the money thing.
Well, and I think that there's also something, because with Peter Vincent, he's played a vampire killer for however many years. And there's a part of him that probably would like to think that that's real, because it gave him purpose to play this character. And now he kind of has a chance to do it. He's getting paid for it, so it gives him an excuse. I think for him, the more I'm thinking about it, I think for him, there's more of an allure here than is even being led on. And I'm not even sure if it was intentional from Tom Holland or not, but it just feels like, and later on, it definitely plays that up when he actually goes into the house, to hunt this vampire.
Yeah.
I think it gives him purpose. Even though he's really just been playing a character, he's almost wants to become that.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't know anything else.
And maybe you play something for so long, you fall into the believability that that's who you are.
Yeah, right.
And he's been playing that role for years.
Exactly.
Amy gives him money. So aside from seeing a young, attractive female, that's what gets her in the door. But she does give him money. Mm-hmm. And this alludes to the fact that also Vincent is poor and has he needs the money.
Right.
And so, but they appease him and they get in touch with Dandridge. And this is what I don't get in terms, because they want to appease Charlie to make sure that he's not, to show him that he's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And they go to Peter Vincent to do that. And Peter Vincent talks, he gets in touch with Dandridge and tells him they're going to be, they do a phone call.
Yeah.
Right?
They do a phone call. And they ask, can we use crosses? Can we use holy water? And, of course, Dandridge says no.
And he says no to all those. And this is where I kind of start to categorize it into comedy.
Right.
And it's not that I don't enjoy it up to this point, because I still enjoy it all the way through.
Sure.
And this just kind of, I realize now more than ever, at least to a degree, that this is kind of verging on a horror comedy.
Well, yeah, and the fact that Charlie would put his faith in an actor, and like, this is the authority. This guy, he's going to prove that this guy's a the fact that he's putting all his hopes into this one guy who's an actor. To me, that's inherently funny. Yeah,
it is funny.
Yeah.
Because the follow-up scene, once they get hold of Dandridge and they do all the cross-check, like, you can't do this, you can't do this, can't do this.
Yeah.
The next scene is Charlie waiting outside the house, waiting for Peter Vincent so they can go to Mr. Dandridge's house and do the test.
Right.
And Charlie's frantic because Peter Vincent's 10 minutes late.
Right.
He's
exactly.
Like, but that whole sequence is kind of, it's kind of comedic.
For sure.
Because it's so kind of just above the air. It's just kind of floating and funny and silly. And they go into Dandridge's house. He invites him in. They go in. Or no, he doesn't invite him in. Billy is Dandridge's sidekick.
Mm-hmm.
Billy invites them in the house.
Yeah.
And I want to get into that a little bit too, because I'm not sure who Billy is when it comes to a being.
Yeah, I don't either. We'll talk about that, though. Yeah.
So they invite him in. They go, and Peter Vincent has brought with him holy water, right?
"Quote unquote holy water."
"Quote unquote holy water." Takes it and offers it to Dandridge.
Dandridge knows it's tap water.
It's tap water.
Right.
So Dandridge drinks it, and this is to appease Charlie, and then also prove that he's crazy.
And to try and stop him from murdering this poor man.
Because that's ultimately what's going to happen. They're thinking that Charlie's going to try to kill Dandridge.
Right.
And then it's going to be bad news for Charlie.
Yeah, exactly.
So he drinks the water, but we know that it's not really holy water. And Charlie even says it, like, how do I know that the Father blessed it, et cetera, et cetera. Right. And then Charlie pulls out a cross. At this moment, he does pull out a cross, and he puts it up. And then everyone's like, "Charlie, stop being crazy and ridiculous and put that away." And in that one slight cut that they use, and it cuts to Dandridge, you see his fear. He takes a step back.
Yep.
And so, but no one, of course, saw that.
Right. No one noticed.
I wanted someone to see it.
Right.
I wanted to cue into Amy going, "Whoa, I saw." You know what I mean?
Well, and that's why I thought that they were going to play up this whole thing where Charlie's crazy the whole movie. I thought that that was gonna be the through line throughout the whole movie, is like, you get so close to busting him in front of people and you don't, but they didn't do that. And very quickly, actually, Peter Vincent pulls out his mirror.
Yes.
Looks, and there's no reflection for Dandridge.
He's looking in the mirror, and then they see no reflection. Dandridge has nothing. This frightens him.
Yep.
So much that he drops the mirror, and as a result, a piece of glass stays on the floor.
I wasn't sure what that was at first.
Yeah. I mean, later then it's revealed that Dandridge steps on it, and that's how he knows that they know now.
Mm-hmm.
Because they saw there was no reflection in the mirror.
Right.
And so they go running out of the house. Peter Vincent's scared. He's shaking. Charlie knows something's up. Right. And he's like, what's wrong with you? What are you doing? And finally, Vincent says, "I'll tell you what I saw," which was no reflection in the mirror. I know that there's something strange there.
Right.
And then he just bolts off.
He just takes off.
He's like, "See ya."
Yeah. Which is what anyone would normally do.
Do you think so?
I would do that. I'd be out of there, man. If I just found out vampires are real, and
if I put myself in the character of Vincent, this is all the more reason that we know that he's a fraud.
For sure.
Because if you were truly had a slight interest in it, yeah, you might. There's an interest of wanting to dig a little deeper.
Well, and I think he's, above all, at this point in the film, I think he's just a coward. I think he's mainly a coward. And there are multiple times he tries running throughout this movie, and this is kind of the first instance of that. And then obviously this is the character arc that we build up to later on. We can talk about that.
That's what it was. Talking quickly about performance, the performance of Peter Vincent by Roddy McDowall. So what immediately, I'm a Planet of the Apes fan. Mm-hmm. The franchise, to me, I've always loved, and so I immediately recognized the name.
Right.
Roddy McDowall, because if you watch the old Planet of the Apes films,
he's in the first two, right?
He's in the first two, Dr. Cornelius.
That's right.
And so I recognized the name. And what's funny is like I wouldn't have recognized his face necessarily.
Right.
Because I've only seen I know that he's done other movies.
Sure.
But what did you think about his performance as Peter Vincent? Because Peter Vincent's basically a play on Vincent Price.
Totally.
At least from what I would assume.
Right.
It's a play on Vincent Price. And what was his? Because you're talking about him being fraudulent and all these kind of things.
I thought at first I wasn't sold on him. It wasn't until later in the film that I actually really appreciated what he was doing, and I actually think he was great.
Yeah.
The only actually performance I wasn't thrilled with was Charlie, and that may have just been because I don't think he was fleshed out as a character very well.
So an interesting fact on that is Evil Ed, the character who plays. The actor who plays Evil Ed was auditioning and wanted to be Charlie.
Oh, no way. That would have put a different spin on it.
Because that would have put a different spin. So we talk about we're talking about these characters and their performances.
Right.
Like let's talk about Evil Ed and his performance.
That kid, I loved him. And he's kind of an iconic character in the horror world. Like I said, I hadn't seen this movie. I thought I had, but I knew of that character and I knew of that performance, and I've seen clips of him. And I thought it was going to be when he showed up, and I'm like, oh, it's this. That's the guy. I thought it was going to be over the top. I thought it was going to be obnoxious. But I actually really loved it. I thought he was a great comedic break. And I loved the character, and I loved what he did with it.
I had a hard time with him.
Really?
My love or affinity for this character and this performance was as schizophrenic as his personality.
Yeah, I can understand that. So
there are moments that I loved him, and I thought it was great. And then there were other moments where I wanted to punch him in the face.
Yeah, for sure.
So, and once again, maybe that plays into the dynamic of that role, but there were things that I just was like, and they're overplaying it, right?
Yeah.
Or is that who we talked about this last time? Because I think there's certain characteristics people just play a role a certain way because it's innately in them.
Right.
And I almost feel like he has a little bit of that in this role.
I think he has to. And I haven't seen anything else he's done, but I really want to now.
And I hated that because I wanted to punch him in the teeth.
Right, totally. I mean, there are times like in the alley later on where you're just like, oh my God, dude, you're terrible.
Yeah.
You're terrible.
And speaking of that, so after they all leave and Vincent Price goes, they're all gone out of Dandridge's house and they're walking home, right? They get to the alley, and then Evil Ed and Charlie and Amy, they all split up.
Right.
And Evil Ed is actually now calling Charlie crazy.
Yep. Straight up, like, you're crazy. Right.
And Evil Ed's like, I'm taking a shortcut through the alley.
Right. And he plays the joke on him. And it was telegraphed in there. Obviously, it's a joke.
Yeah.
And this is the part where I hated him.
Yeah.
Up till now, I'm like, okay, I like this guy. Like, I can get into it. And I thought he did a great job. But this is the part it's just like, and I think it was just the writing, honestly, more than anything.
Yeah.
It's just like, I mean, come on, man. And then, but what happens to Evil Ed, I was not expecting.
Yeah.
I was not expecting him to turn.
So here's the thing about that scene. Once Evil Ed, Charlie, and Amy split their ways, Evil Ed goes down the alleyway. One thing I love from a technical standpoint is what Tom Holland does really well, and that I kind of dug, I kind of got into, was how he would do the approach of Dandridge or the vampire.
Yes.
So you see, once Evil Ed is walking down the alley, and you see this kind of almost bird's eye shot, and it's this high aerial, and it's kind of following, and they also give like this cool sound effect of like it's not quite wings flapping like a bat, but it's got a little whoosh to it, a little wind, and you know that that's a POV of the actual character or the vampire or Dandridge.
Yep, absolutely.
And it's cool. And that shot when he's in the alleyway and he's doing that, it actually, what's cool about it is it changes perspectives in the shot. So what I mean is, it starts out bird's eye over Evil Ed. We hear the whoosh. So now we are POV from Dandridge's point of view, right? His perspective. And then the camera starts to pan and crane downwards.
Oh, I don't remember that part.
And then it hits the alleyway while we still see, it's all one shot. We still see Evil Ed walking down the alley. And then as it comes down, we get an over the shoulder of Dandridge. So now it's changed. Like it's still Dandridge's perspective,
right.
But now he's actually in the frame.
Well, and I know there's a couple times when they do that kind of thing where the cameras, it just feels like it's floating in the air.
Some really cool camera movements.
Very cool, yeah.
What I was impressed with also was that this is Tom Holland's first feature film.
Oh, really? I had no idea.
So the execution of these types of shots, you know, anytime you step into a director's role, like you've directed short films and I've directed projects, and every time you're looking at a story, trying to break it down and figure out where the coverage points are and how to do it, like what I was impressed with Holland is the way that he moves the camera and uses the movement to really help build the story.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a maturity there in what he was doing that you don't see in first-time directors very often.
Most times you don't see that in first-time directors, yeah. Once Dandridge confronts Evil Ed in the alleyway, is that vampire mental exercises that he throws on Evil Ed? Because it's not a thing of like the vampire going in and just kind of grabbing him and using brute force and strength to like just take a bite out of the neck. It's actually like an offering.
It felt almost like he knows, and this is where I'm a little disappointed that there wasn't more, I guess, exposition on Evil Ed and kind of his character, because this is the part where they want you to believe that he's been bullied and he's tired of being bullied. And I just didn't see it very often, other than him saying, "Stop calling me evil." I didn't really see him getting bullied a whole lot.
That's a great point, because I was wondering what the offering was and why immediately Evil Ed was so submissive.
Well, and because Dandridge says something to him along those lines, like, you'll never be pushed around again. I'll see to it. All you got to do is embrace me.
He does.
And that's when I'm like, okay, that's what they were trying to go with evil, but they just didn't do it.
I like that angle, and I like that analysis. And I think that that's one area where they possibly could have improved the development of the character.
And that's why I wonder if stuff got cut, more stuff about evil got cut. I don't know, but it just felt like something. When I saw that part, I was like, something's missing. Because
that's the other thing. We were talking about Evil's character, and I half the time I liked him, half the time I didn't.
Right.
But I never really sympathized with him in that way.
Right, not at
where
all.
I felt bad.
Right. I liked seeing him on screen. I thought he was funny, and I thought he was a good change of pace, but I never once sympathized with him.
And so Dandridge makes an offering, and Evil's submissive, and he holds his hand up, and you basically know he's going to turn him.
Yep.
And that's a great. I like your thesis on that. So Evil ends up getting turned, and at this point, now Dandridge starts to follow Charlie and Amy down through the town and all this stuff. And while that's happening, Evil makes his way back to Peter Vincent's apartment.
Yes.
And he goes into Peter Vincent. Peter Vincent allows him to come in, and now Peter Vincent's frantically scared. He's like, "What are we going to do?
Right.
How are we going to do it?" He doesn't know, because he knows that Dandridge is truly a vampire.
Right.
And then this is where talk about we go back to some of the practical effects and some of the prosthetics and things like that, because Evil is now starting to turn.
Yep.
So his mouth is changing and his teeth are changing, etc. He's getting the eyes and everything. And we go to those teeth.
Those teeth. Oh my God, those teeth. They're terrible. They're terrible. To me, it took me out of it, because I was believing it, and I was into it, and I was feeling it, and then those teeth are just so bad.
They're too intrusive to the character, and they don't feel authentic to that, to what's going on. Like, I agree, they'll take you out of it, and the character can't even deliver the line of dialogue.
No, not at all. He's drooling, he's spitting everywhere. It was super annoying.
Yeah, and he's basically the confrontation is essentially Peter Vincent and Evil Ed, who kind of goes to attempt to turn Peter Vincent.
Right.
And then they kind of do a little wrestle, but then Peter Vincent holds up a cross. Or no, he burns him on the head. Sorry.
He burns him on the head, and this is where Peter Vincent, he starts to believe that maybe he is a vampire killer. And this is the part where he's starting to get a little bit more confidence, because he just took out this vampire, even though it's just a brand new vampire, just barely birthed, essentially.
Yeah.
The thing I didn't understand is it doesn't seem like the rules are consistent, because early on, Evil tells Charlie, you have to have faith in order for the cross to work.
Right.
And later on, we see the cross doesn't work on Dandridge when Peter Vincent's holding it, but it does work on Evil. So I don't understand the rules here.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's an oversight or if I'm missing something.
I could be missing something too, but I thought a similar thing. And while you were saying that, there's a little inconsistency in the rules.
Right.
The only thing I could say would be that either does it have to do with the fact that because Evil Ed is just a freshly turned vampire?
Could be.
That he's so easily quote unquote manipulated by the cross,
right,
because his power's not strong enough.
And that's kind of what I took from it. I think
that's the only thing I could think of, because I thought the same thing later. It becomes a plot point where Dandridge does that and says you have to have faith.
Right.
But he burns this cross in the head. That was a cool effect.
That was very cool.
So that helped me get past the teeth.
For sure.
He burns the cross in, and then. We keep going back to this, but then because he's holding the cross up, Evil needs to get out of the house. He needs to leave, and he dive bombs out the window.
He pulls a Sally from Texas Chainsaw.
That's right. He pulls a Sally, dive bombs out the window, and now you're right. I think at this point, Peter Vincent's starting to believe himself,
right,
and what he always has proclaimed to be.
Right.
You know?
He still tries to bail later on, but I think. If it wasn't for this interaction, I don't think he would have been enticed to come back.
So it's a good turning point in the story for that character development to give him a little courage.
And this is kind of where the point, it's a little bit after this, where I start to think that Peter Vincent becomes the main character. I've lost interest in Charlie a long time ago.
Yeah, you were saying that, and I'd like to get into that a little bit, which is like what you hated Charlie.
I didn't hate him, but I just thought he was, I don't understand his character. Where does he have all this bravery to just charge head on into dangerous situations? I just don't. I feel like there was a lot of character development that was not done on him, and I just felt I didn't relate to him. I don't know where he came from. I thought the actor he was fine. There was just nothing that grabbed me about Charlie as much as the other characters.
Yeah, that's interesting. And at the end, like, I think that Peter Vincent probably plays almost as big a role as Charlie does.
Yeah, I agree.
To some extent.
I agree.
And we'll get into that ending here shortly. But that's an interesting viewpoint. It's an interesting stance. I think that's, you have to have a character that people can get behind. If you have a hard time getting behind the main character, the believability of the story becomes that much less involved for the audience.
Right.
So that's an interesting perspective. From Charlie's, I also didn't love his performance as an actor. There was, and it goes back to that believability, and it could actually be more in the character writing than the actual performance
and it
itself.
could be. But I saw a thing on Amazon Prime. They have the little tidbits, the little trivia facts, and I guess Charlie Sheen auditioned to play Charlie. And the Tom Holland didn't think he had the right look, which is interesting. I'm not sure what look they were going for, because he had that college professor's coat on the whole time. He looked like he was 25 years old. He didn't look like he was 17. So I'm not quite sure what look they were specifically going for with him.
And that's one that's one flaw for me that is tough to get past.
Right.
Because your main character should be the umbilical cord into the audience.
I agree, totally.
And he just doesn't have that. And sometimes it's innate. Like a certain actor just has something that you can get behind.
Right.
Whether they're playing a certain role or not.
Sure.
And so maybe that kind of was lacking for me. So that's an interesting stance to take on, and I think I agree with that.
Because I think Tom Holland wrote this too, right?
Yeah, he was the writer-director.
And it's probably the first feature he's written too.
It's not, actually.
Oh, it's not?
Yeah, he had done a few other films, and I don't remember them off the top of my head, but he had written other screenplays. And then this tidbit was that he had started to pitch around this one, Fright Night.
Okay.
And everybody was like, yeah, it's okay, but no one was biting on it because part of the stipulation was that he wanted to direct it.
Okay.
And so a lot of times people get hesitant, and producers and executives get hesitant because it's a first-time director.
Kind of like a Rocky type thing.
Yeah.
Right.
But in this case, he had written other films that had been produced.
Okay.
Yeah. But I thought, once again, and we'll throw it back, as a director, he did a great job.
Phenomenal.
So now it's Charlie and Amy, and they're running, and now Dandridge is after them. He's already turned Evil Ed. And then they're running through the town, and they end up getting into an alleyway, and then they bolt through a club.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's dancing and music starts.
This is where the music was driving me crazy.
Okay.
I mean, this whole scene, it's so 80s, and I have a hard time with heavy 80s movies, and it's almost specifically because of the music. That music is like fingernails on a chalkboard for me. That's why I'm not happy with the whole Stranger Things fad going on right now, because the synth music just drives me insane. It just drives me insane.
This music is, so I can see for you why it drives you crazy, because it's all 80s. I'll read you a couple titles of these songs, and you can immediately know it's in the 80s.
Okay.
Save Me Tonight.
Of course.
Armies of the Night. Sorry. Boppin' Tonight, Come to Me, Let's Talk, Rock Myself to Sleep, and Good Man in a Bad Time. I mean, these are all utterly just 80s titles.
And I wonder if if these songs were chosen because of the titles. Because if you look at it, it's all describing what's going on in the scene.
Yes. It's completely a form of narration.
Yes, for
in
sure.
a sense. Like the lyrics that are being delivered through the music are actually kind of in a narrative sense telling us what's going on screen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So there's some interesting, had a hard time with the 80s soundtrack.
Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't mind it. I actually like it because it's very specific.
For sure.
And like you said, you can identify those, immediately go, that's the 80s.
Right.
And so I kind of got behind it.
Well, and I understand there are the majority of people enjoy that, and they like the 80s for that reason, because of the music and all that, the neon and the hair and the shoulder pads on the women and all that stuff. But for me, it's just like, I grew up in that. I don't need to see this again.
You weren't interested.
No, not at all. Not at all. I'm weird like that. People enjoy it.
But they're in the club, and then Dandridge is making his way through the crowd, and he's kind of finding himself getting closer and closer to Charlie and to Amy, and he's doing this seductive walk.
Yeah, that was interesting.
You know, he's going, and at this point, I'm wondering if that's partly the vampire ability to read minds. I like how they filmed it, because for me, it felt like we were getting into Dandridge's ability to kind of read into Amy's mind, because he's seductively kind of pulling her in, even though they're physically separated by a lot of space.
That's interesting.
And it's a weird kind of movement, almost like snake-like.
Yeah.
So if you look at the way that Dandridge movie goes from screen left to right and then right to left,
right,
and kind of snaking his way, and it's cutting to shots of Amy, and we see Amy's response. She's almost like getting caught up in the seductive power.
Absolutely.
I liked it. I thought it was funny.
That's interesting.
Because ultimately that's what's happening.
Right.
And he's using that power, and then he gets up to Amy and they start dancing.
Yeah, they do. You can call it that.
I mean, Dandridge takes some liberties here. You know what I mean?
Straight up on the dance floor in front of everybody.
He's not afraid.
He's going up the skirt. I'm like, what?
He's a little Harvey Weinstein action.
Straight up, no remorse, no regrets, just go right in.
It's very provocative and very unprofessional on Dandridge's part.
Exactly.
That's the only word I could literally come up with. But she does succumb to the powers to a degree. She's very that's the seduction of the vampire. Yeah. That's vampire lore, right? It's very overtly sexual. Mm-hmm. It's very out there and seductive, and she's falling into that.
Right.
And then as they're walking out, because somehow Charlie and Amy got separated.
Yeah, she just kind of went with Dan.
It was just her leading or following him.
Right. And Charlie's on the phone, I think, with Peter Vincent.
And that's what it was. He ended up calling Peter.
Right.
And so they're separated, and this time Dandridge is taking full effect.
Oh, totally.
By the time he gets off the phone with Vincent, Dandridge and Amy are walking out the club.
I mean, just like it's nothing.
They're ready to go do the nasty.
He stole his girl, man.
Yeah.
Straight up.
but not before he gets confronted by some security guards, and then Dandridge goes full vamp again.
Yep. And at one point, Dandridge also tells Charlie, if you want to get her back, you need to bring Peter Vincent to my house.
Yeah, why was that, though?
I think...
What's the appeal about Peter Vincent?
The only thing I could think of is when Peter Vincent burned Evil said the Master is going to kill you for this. So that's the only thing... Talking about Dandridge, the Master, that's the only thing I could think is maybe he wanted a little bit of revenge, or maybe it's just because Peter Vincent's a loose end. He knows he's a vampire and he's got to take care of it. But he really doesn't need them to come to him. I mean, he's a vampire.
I thought the whole point was he wanted Amy.
Yeah, I thought so.
Because even when they very first visit the house, right, when they're trying to prove to Charlie that he's not a vampire, like there's a little background talk between Dandridge and Amy, and she's kind of like flirting, and he's kind of like flirting back.
She's already sucked into his charm.
Yeah,
right.
And so I didn't understand that point, which was like bring Peter Vincent back. But I think you allude to some good points. Are they validated enough for me to go yes or no? Like I'm still unsure.
A little convenient.
Yeah. Dandridge goes full vampire in the club, takes some people out, and then ends up taking Amy back to his house and his lair. Here's a couple questions for you. Okay. Charlie gets to the house. Mm-hmm. He goes in and he's confronted, or he runs into Billy. Now Billy's the sidekick to Dandridge. Right. Then Vincent shows up, and then they both confront Billy. What I want to get into, can we determine what kind of being Billy is?
I don't know, because Peter Vincent even says, he's got a gun to use on Billy. And Charlie says, well, what if he's a vampire? And Peter Vincent says to him, he walks freely in the daylight, doesn't he? So he's not a vampire. So how can he walk around in the daylight, but bullets don't kill him? I think it was a stake to the heart killed him.
Yeah, because Charlie has that stake,
right?
And as he's walking up the stairs, Peter Vincent shoots him in the forehead,
and he falls down. You think he's dead,
and then he does that when we go back to the shot, because in the foreground is Peter Vincent and Charlie, and in the background the slow rise,
and he starts walking up the stairs. Very effective shot, by the way, very effective.
And it plays into that thing that you were mentioning earlier, which is like there's kind of a tradition to that shot.
Right.
But then we know Billy's not dead.
Right. And so he keeps shooting him.
So he's undead. He's an undead.
He's an undead, but he's not a vampire because he can walk around during the day. So I don't know what he is. And when he finally gets him with the stake, he straight up melts into a skeleton. And the other vampires didn't do that.
Yeah, there's like acid or green goo.
So I don't know what he is, but I'm kind of intrigued to know what he is. And I know there's a sequel to this. I don't know if it talks about that or if it goes into that. But I would love to know what kind of monster Billy is.
Because he basically dissolves into a skeleton and then shatters.
Oh, it's awesome, by the way. I loved it.
That's the best for me, I think, just in terms of effects and in terms of the effectiveness of how they do it. It was so good.
I loved it. I was so geeking out so hard. So
they kill Billy. And while this is going, one thing that I neglected to mention is that there's a moment where Peter Vincent actually runs out of the house. Mm-hmm. Once he's in Dandridge's house, he runs out to go tell Charlie's mom.
Well, you thought he was being a coward again. You thought he was just bailing.
Yeah. I assumed that he was going to hit the road again.
Right.
But he goes back because Charlie's been taken captive by Dandridge and put in the same room as Amy, who's now through a certain phase of the turning into a vampire.
Yes. Yep.
But Peter Vincent goes back to Charlie's house to tell his mom, which I don't know why he went to tell the mom.
It's very bizarre. I didn't understand that.
But this is another scene that's really fun.
Yeah.
And I have questions on, and I want to hear your opinion, is Peter Vincent goes back and he goes into the mom's room to wake her up, and in the bed is Evil Ed with a Raggedy Ann wig on.
It made me laugh. It
was hilarious.
I loved it.
And then they have a confrontation, and Peter Vincent starts to run out, And he's in the hallway, and then all of a sudden, Evil Ed turns into a wolf.
Yeah, which I guess they can do. I don't know.
This is where I was hoping we'd have some real vampire studies. Because
Right.
I don't know, can they turn into wolves?
I've never heard that. I know they can turn into bats, obviously.
Bats make sense.
And the funny thing is, later on, we see what it looks like when they turn into a bat, and it's a grotesque-looking bat.
Yeah.
But this wolf looks like a real wolf. It's not like a caricature, grotesque wolf. It's just it's a straight-up wolf.
Yeah, and then once he turns, he's running down the hallway, and then it jumps to get Peter Vincent in the hallway. And look, it's either a trained dog, a husky dog that looks like a wolf, or it's a wolf dog.
Right.
And it jumps up, and Peter Vincent stabs it.
Yep.
With the stake. And this scene is awesome.
I loved it. I loved it.
It was so well executed.
Yep.
And he falls down through the chandelier, and it looks authentic. It looks real.
Looks like a real.
It looks
dog
like a
or
real
wolf
dog
sitting there dying with a stake through it.
It's awesome.
It's amazing.
It's so well done. And then it slowly starts to show the wolf turn back into Evil Ed, and that was cool. Those were cool prosthetics.
Very cool.
It was a mixture of like a human and then had a dog head and a dog shoulder, but his arms were real.
Well, and I
because he was turning.
I read a little bit about this. It was a mixture of puppetry and the actual actor. So they had a big wolf puppet, and then they just had it like on top of him, and he had his arms out, and it was his real arms, and it was really the actor who's grabbing at Peter Vincent. And
it was so cool because I was watching it with my wife, and she even was like, oh, "That's gross," because it felt so real.
Right.
And I thought that was just awesome. It was a cool scene.
Loved it.
But the question comes in like, this is something, and anybody that's listening, they can maybe give us some comments on or some feedback, because I didn't know vampires turned into wolves.
I didn't know that either.
And maybe it's just my naivete in vampire studies.
Right. It could be, or maybe it's just in this universe. I don't know.
So he turns in, but then Vincent makes his way back, and Charlie's now with Amy, and Amy's turned. And then Vincent makes his way. He breaks the door down and frees Charlie from the room.
Yep.
And they're like, we can't leave because Amy's here and she's going through this suffering. In other words, she's turning.
Right.
And it's this big change, and she can't really move.
Right.
She's under some kind of trance. And then at this point, Dandridge is outside, and you see these cool POV shots again, and they have him like flying through the window and by the window and all
he's
these
over
kind
here,
of things.
He's on the roof. And
it's cool.
This is part that was bugging me about Charlie's character is he's like, he's over here. I'm going to run over here. He's over here. No, I'm going to go this way. And it's like, where is he getting this bravery?
Yeah.
Like Peter Vincent's an old wise man, and he's like barely hanging on.
Yeah.
And this dumb kid is just like, I'm going to go fight this head vampire guy.
And also, if you think about it, Peter Vincent's character is the one that kills Evil Ed.
Yeah.
So he's already taken him out.
Yep.
So there, at some point, like we were discussing before, there's a possibility that there's almost a shift in character.
I really felt like
protagonist almost.
in the third act. I really felt like Peter Vincent was the main character.
Yeah.
I just didn't. I forgot it. I kind of forgot about Charlie. I didn't really care to go back to him. I knew he was kind of in peril because he's in the same room with Amy, but I just didn't really care. I was more interested to see what's going on with Peter Vincent.
Because not only did he kill Evil Ed, but now he's freeing Charlie, or attempting. He's now freeing Charlie, so he's kind of the hero in this.
That's a full character arc. He went from a coward, kind of fraud guy, to the hero. Yeah. And I thought that was really cool. I was far more interested in that.
Yeah, it's good development.
And on the other hand, I just can't get a grasp on Charlie whatsoever.
Because once they try to. Once they get freed and they try to go down in the stairs, and then there's another confrontation with Dandridge, right? And now Dandridge is starting to turn. He's like full blown. He's on the staircase and he's turning into full demonic mode.
Yep.
And he turns it. Eventually, he does the full transformation into a bat.
Yeah.
Right. And then flies around the room. This is kind of a cool thing too. I wonder if there was any slight puppetry with that particular technical
shot. I think
shot.
there probably had to have been.
It just seemed cool how they did it.
Yeah.
Although once the bat land, and that's the other thing, the bat actually, doesn't it land on Peter Vincent?
Yeah, it kind of takes him out, and I think Peter Vincent had a cane or something, and he was kind of fending it off. He's had it in his mouth.
But then he ends up injuring it.
Yeah.
he injures Dandridge.
Right.
So once again, Peter Vincent's like the lead here. He's the one that's like kind of the stronger character. Dandridge is injured, so he flies into the basement, into the coffin.
That's right.
And then they get to the area with the coffin, and Peter Vincent's the one that actually has the bravery to open the coffin and actually stab Dandridge. It doesn't quite kill him, right? So Dandridge gets up, and then they're in this room.
They did that perfect classic vampire shot of the vampire rising from the coffin. You have to have that shot in a vampire movie. Which
is kind of the static motion forward.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
And he had a stake in his heart, you have to have that shot. It's so awesome.
Traditional.
Yeah, definitely.
But it doesn't kill him at that moment. And then they're in this room, and this is the final confrontation.
Right. And apparently the whole basement is made of glass.
Yeah. We were like, wait, what?
I don't understand.
Because in the beginning of the film, the coffins go into the basement.
Right. Underground.
Underground.
Yeah.
So where's the glass coming from?
Exactly.
Because it's just window. Because the idea is that eventually Charlie throws a rock and it shatters a hole in a window that it's now morning, it's dawn, and the sunlight is beaming through the crack that he threw the rock through.
Right.
And it hits Dandridge. And so now they understand that if we throw a bunch of rocks at these windows that I don't know where they came from because we're in a basement.
Boards or window? I don't understand. They're breaking like glass, but I mean glass is see-through.
If we forgive the fact that we thought they were in the basement,
exactly,
and we just go now they're somewhere else,
and forgive the fact that he had to be dead by morning in order to save Amy, by dawn. So that was the whole plot point: is they had to kill him before dawn, in order to save Amy. Well, it's past dawn because the sun's up.
She would have fully turned.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So there's a couple elements in the story that we go,
right.
We're leaning into a little bit of unbelievability.
Yeah, in this vampire movie, there's some unbelievability.
There's some unbelievability in this vampire movie. Damn it!
Exactly.
It's supposed to be real.
Exactly.
But they start throwing rocks, and then all the beams start shattering through, and this is what ends up being the demise of Dandridge.
Yep.
Right. And they're victorious.
Yeah.
And in their plot to kill this vampire
and to save Amy, and she's back to normal. And never mind the dead kid that's in Charlie's house. We never hear what happened because remember, after Evil dies, he turns back into just himself.
Yeah,
the burned cross is gone on his forehead, so he's just laying there in Charlie's house, a dead kid, and no one seems to care.
It's a moot point.
Yeah, exactly. They're just back to making out on the bed.
Because the next follow-up is like everything back to square one.
Right.
Everything's back to normal.
Right.
It's the two of them back and then Peter Vincent's on television again. He's got his host job back.
Yep.
And he throws a little shout out to Charlie but they're back to normal. Forget about Evil Ed and his dead body.
Right.
Yeah,
but then it's kind of hinted that Evil Ed's not really dead,
and so that's exactly it. Because Evil Ed, there was no dead body.
Right.
Because I guess the last shot is them is Charlie and Amy in the bedroom, and then it cuts to where we started at the beginning of the film with a shot looking into Dandridge's house or old house, and you see two bright eyes light up. Evil says something at the end of in
his very distinct
voice. Something about Brewster. Because it's Charlie's last name.
Yeah.
And that alludes to the fact that indeed that Evil isn't dead. So there was never a dead kid in the house.
I guess that explains it.
He's living on. And in Fright Night 2, which I haven't seen, maybe there's some story continuation with that kind of thing. Let's go. Old versus new horror. So looking at horror films, the question is, so far we've done A Nightmare on Elm Street, we've done A Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and now we've done Fright Night. We talked about this a little bit last podcast with some of the history of horror films. Mm-hmm. Where does this fit into the mold or the structure of a horror film for you? Is it something, it's not quite similar to the other movies that we've seen up to this point or we've discussed. It falls in some ways in more of a traditional horror structure.
Yeah, I'd say so. And it's really hard, at least for me, to make vampires scary.
Yeah.
30 Days of Night did a good job because they're inhuman. But when they start getting really seductive and stuff, to me, it's not really scary anymore. So it's hard to call this a horror movie, but It is. It totally is. But I don't know. I'd say it's definitely a cult classic. It's not one of my favorites, but it's definitely a cult classic. And I can see why people who love this movie love it. It just didn't reach me at the right time of my life, I think. I think if I would have grown up with it, I would have appreciated it a lot more, and I probably would be looking back a lot more fondly on it.
I like that point because I kind of fall into the same boat. I didn't get in on it early enough.
Right.
I think if I had gotten it earlier, I would have had a little bit more appreciation for it.
Right.
I had fun with the movie.
For sure.
Overall, minus some of the parts that we talked about, but I just wasn't nostalgic in a way that I probably would have been in another film.
Yes.
I also read something about it emulating and kind of being very similar to a movie by Roman Polanski.
Oh, which one?
So there's a film called The Fearless Vampire Killers.
Oh, I haven't seen that one.
And apparently, and for those that out there that have seen that movie, I guess there's a lot of tie-ins between the stories of each of these films.
Mm-hmm.
So that's an interesting one. That would be like a recommendation. If anybody really enjoyed Fright Night, that they should look, and Roman Polanski being the caliber filmmaker that he is, The Fearless Vampire Killers might be an interesting
I'll have to watch that for sure. And it also reminded me a lot, because this is a movie that came out 2 years after this, I think, was The Lost Boys. There was a lot that I think The Lost Boys probably lifted from this movie. A lot of the same
That's a
tropes.
great point. And I actually have more nostalgia for Lost Boys.
Me too.
Yeah, and I'd seen that a lot earlier on. And you say that, and I actually go back to the point that we were bringing up earlier, which is the POV shot.
Yes. Yeah, when they're flying in. Yeah, exactly.
The aerial POV shots of the vampires.
Those were a little bit more chaotic, a little bit more Evil Dead style.
Yeah. Where
the camera's moving around a little bit more. Here it was far more graceful the way the camera was
Yeah,
moving.
there was a lot more fluidity to it.
For sure. And also, obviously, I know your buddy had mentioned this Rear Window.
Yeah. So taking something as classic as Hitchcock's film
right.
and going, how did they mold that storyline into something with vampires?
Well, and that's the first thing I thought when he's sitting there watching, literally with binoculars watching. That's what I was thinking, Rear Window.
Yep. So there's a tie in there. So the story was based on The Boy Who Cried Wolf.
Although there wasn't a whole lot of crying wolf.
No.
False crying wolf, I should say.
Right, but the concept of no one believing you.
For sure.
It took Holland 3 weeks to write the script.
That's it?
Yep. He couldn't stop writing. He just mentioned I wrote it in about 3 weeks, and I was laughing the entire time. Literally on the floor, kicking my feet in the air in hysterics because there's something so humorous in the basic concept. So it was always, along with the thrills and chills, something there that tickled your funny bone. It wasn't a broad comedy, but it's a grin all the way through.
Yeah, I'd agree
so that's
with that.
Holland's synopsis of how he wrote the film.
Some humility
and it goes
from Holland.
Yeah, and it goes back to this point that we were talking about before. If you were to categorize it in a genre, and I was saying, look, I think it's comedy.
It definitely does. I guess when I think of 80s horror comedies, I'm thinking, and I don't know if you've seen this, Return of the Living Dead. It's basically just kind of slapstick. The zombies are able to talk, and also The Lost Boys, with Corey Feldman. Both Corys, I should say. Those I would classify more as when I think of 80s horror comedies, that's what I think of. And I actually like this better than the way those styles of movies are done.
Yeah, I agree. By the time Fright Night came around, Holland was already a Hollywood veteran because he had already acted and directed in multiple films.
Interesting.
Not directed. Acted and written multiple films. And by the time he did Fright Night, this was the first film where he had sufficient credibility in Hollywood to be able to direct. So he kind of leveraged what he had done up to that point. And like we were talking about before, like he wrote this for himself to direct it.
Nice.
Apparently Chris Sarandon, who plays Dandridge, did not want to initially play the role.
Really?
Yeah, that's what it says here in some of the research. He said, my agent said that someone was interested in the possibility of my doing the movie, and I said to myself, there's no way I can do a horror movie. I can't do a vampire movie. I can't do a movie with a first-time director.
Wow.
So that's from Sarandon.
He just nailed it.
Because he did really well.
Right.
It was a great performance. Vincent Price apparently loved the movie.
No.
So
I can see that.
Yeah, so he apparently loved it. He said it was wonderful, and he thought that Roddy McDowall, who played Peter Vincent, did a wonderful job. And he said, I thank God that he didn't ask me to play the role of the
Vincent Price can't play that role.
He can't.
There's no way.
No.
There's too much vulnerability in there.
Yeah. So this movie came out in August of 1985. 91% on Rotten Tomatoes from the critics.
From the critics.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just blown away. The critics love these horror movies so much.
76% from the audience.
Okay. That makes a little bit more sense. 91%. And I think it must be from the technical standpoint like we talked about.
I think once again they're looking at it, understanding the work that it takes to get some of the shots they got.
I think so, yeah.
Where are you going to put it in terms of your rating? If you have to go out of 10, where's it going to fall for you?
I'm kind of wavering, and this is going to sound weird, between 6.5 and 7. 6.5 just kind of seems low, but 7 seems a little high. It's good, and I would recommend it if you are a horror movie person. Even if you're not, it's good movie. It's a lot of fun. But, without really liking the main character a whole lot and some of the other plot points and some of the other story or plot holes and some of the other story problems, it's just I can't get it up much higher than that.
Yeah. So I think we're kind of flowing in the same direction. Mm-hmm. For me, love Chris Sarandon as Dandridge in The Vampire. I think we nailed that. We talked about it. Really didn't love Evil. It was the 50-50 split. Mm-hmm. The character for me was good, and then I was like obnoxious at the same time.
Yeah.
And, it's interesting because this protagonist I don't necessarily love all the way through. I don't have empathy or sympathy for Charlie much at all. I think as a story, it's really fun. I think from a filmmaker's perspective, I love the technical approaches that they took. I'm blown away at Holland's ability to write and direct something that's fun. I do like that they touch into the comedy. So for me, that's a big piece to it. It's not just he's kind of playing a hybrid in two worlds, which is horror comedy. He's not going authentic like Chainsaw.
Right.
And he's not going just complete comedy and absurdity either. He's playing in that middle ground. And I liked that. I thought that was an interesting take on it.
And I think he towed that line very, very well.
And I think the execution of being able to manipulate both sides, he does a great job.
I agree.
And I would recommend it. I think everyone should go watch the film. It's a great, fun October movie.
Yes.
You don't want to get crazy scared.
Right.
But you want to have a fun time. I think this is the one to watch.
I agree.
Maybe throw a couple back and just have a good laughing time watching this film. And so I'm going to come in out of a 10. I'm going to go like a 7.2.
Okay. 7.2. I like
7.2. And I'm going a little high and I'm being a little forgiving because once again, I'm looking at it from that filmmaker's eye, which is like, this is his first directorial
for sure
film.
And those practical effects, the gore effects were great.
So good.
It's not over the top gory, but it's just like enough just to satisfy a gore hound like me. It was good. It was fun. It was a lot of fun.
It was a good, fun movie. So going into this next week, we'll continue Horror Month. We're going to change it up a bit. As a quick review for anybody listening, we've done A Nightmare on Elm Street, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Fright Night, and coming into the next podcast, we're going to do the Blair Witch Project.
Ooh, another one of my favorites.
So we're going to change it up a little bit, talk about that genre and how it revolutionized the found footage category. Really invented it.
Yeah.
And so we'll take Blair Witch Project head on.
Cool.
Into the next cast. Alan, thanks for bearing with me.
Oh, hey, thank
Getting
you
through
for
Fright
having me on
Night.
again. I love it, man. I love it.
And thanks for listening, everybody. This is Tame Aperture Podcast signing out.
The Tame Aperture Podcast is produced by Dutch Angle Pictures in association with Studio B Productions. Listen, watch, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, and YouTube.